Can I talk? Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to my tool in action session called CRaSH, an extensible shell for the Java virtual machine. We are going to present you today this talk in two parts. First, we'll have a few slides to introduce the context of CRaSH, why we did that, why it is relevant. And then most of the talk will be about doing demonstrations. So first, let's introduce ourselves. So I'm Julien Viette. I've been developing open source software for 10 years. I've been involved in the JBoss stuff story since in 2002. Then I did open source at Red Hat, and today I'm working for exo platform and companies that also provides open source products based on open source projects. And
hi everyone, I'm Alain de France. I'm working at exo platform. I'm in charge of social projects. So I'm running open source every day, and I contribute to some open source project, and I joined CRaSH project. So I contribute some feature, and I will focus myself on demo on this session, and I let Julien start the talk.
Okay, thank you. So yes, the story about the project. So the real story is that I started it 3 years ago during the vacations of Christmas. Everybody was in vacations. I was a bit bored, not bored, but I had to find something to do. And I thought it would be cool to create a shell for the JVM, but it really started very simply. And then the project continued to evolve for a couple of years, and this year it was more used internally by EXO and also personally myself. And last year I submitted, I found the project cool and I wanted to share it, so I submitted a quickie at DevOps France that was accepted, and it motivated me to make the 1.0 release of CRaSH last April. And during the summer, we released the 1.1, and now we are actively working on the 1.2 versions. That is today in release candidate, and that should be finished, I think, in November or December. So yes, that's a question, what, why? Even though today we have more and more sophisticated user interface, as a developer or as administrators or whatever you are, I think that most of you still use the command line interface. At least I do. And I think it's interesting to provide, can you go back? Sorry. Yes, I think it's interesting to provide a shell for the JVM. Why? Because yes, it's ubiquitous. You all have, I think, on your laptops a shell running. It's ubiquitous, yes, so it's expressive. You can write powerful things like this. It's also, yes, a bit trendy, I think, because more and more, with stuff like cloud, we need a remote access to clouds, or all the database, like the new NoSQL stuff have such tools, and even some projects like Drupal, or it's not written here, but Jenkins also, yes, has such thing. There's also Microsoft PowerShell that is quite interesting concept. So comparison with Unix shells, so it's quite simple. It's from the client perspective, when you are a user, it's very easy. It looks the same. You have access to a command line interface with commands and options. Commands can be simple or composed. Like Git, for instance, you do a Git fetch, so you have composite commands. So that's very useful because it gives a namespace to the command. Options, arguments, and also we have pipes. But the main difference is that inside, it's not hosted by the operating system, but by the JVM. So everything is done in the JVM. So we use Java threads, and when you write a CRaSH command, you have access to the whole JVM ecosystem that we will see after. So that part is important, usage. So we have several ways to use CRaSH. First, it started as an embedded as in web application. That was the way to start CRaSH. And then we had the idea to make it standalone. So you run CRaSH in your own VM. And then you also have the attach mode, and we'll see that later. It's if you are familiar with Visual VM, you can connect to an existing virtual machines and do stuff like getting beans or monitoring stuff. And so we use more or less the same API to do the same thing, and it's very, very interesting. So the stack is quite simple. So we always have a native client, and the native client can be your shell. So in standalone, it's direct access with the Java console, but it can be SSH or Telnet. But we do even have other connectors, which are the console, the web and the Visual VM connector. And then you have the CRaSH runtime. And then you inside, in the CRaSH runtime, you have commands written in Groovy. So what you can do with CRaSH, so that's more or less what we are going to see, is that there are several ways to use CRaSH, and that's what we are going to show you during the talk. So the first presentation we do, we call it out of the box. So we have 4 presentations. And the first one is really to make you to get familiar with CRaSH. So we will install it, download it, install it, review a bit the layout. And in this part, we'll focus on the standalone mode of CRaSH. It means it will run its own virtual machine, and we will execute basic commands to show you what you can do out of the box with CRaSH. So Alain. So yeah, that's the CRaSH website. So you can download it from the site. So it's called crashhub.org. And now, so that's now we need to see the layout, the directory layout of CRaSH. So we are going to unzip it. So you get, that's a snapshot, but you can get a better release. And in standalone mode, you have this layout. You have bin. In bin, you have crash.sh or crash.bat. That helps you to run the shell. Then you have the CMD directory. Inside, we put additional commands. So by default, you have a lot of commands, but those commands are Groovy files, and they are stored in jars. But we can add new commands in command. Conf is where we put configuration, so it's quite simple. And we have a property file to configure things. So by default, what is interesting is that you can change the security or disable a plugin or change the SSH credentials. So let's start CRaSH in standalone. Yeah, so maybe you should increase the font size. Is everybody able who is not able to read the shell? You, but you are very far. There are many empty places here. Can you increase the font size, or would it be an issue? I think we didn't figure out this part clearly. Yeah, so is that better?
Is it better?
Perfect. I hope it's better for us too, because sometimes we have some layout issues. So let's start. So yes, when you run it, so it's started.sh, and it displays a nice logo. And so the first thing we are going to do is use help. So help gives you an overview of all the existing commands. So that is very dynamic. It means if we add a new command, it will show up instantly. So let's review what we can do out of the box. So by default, that's an empty JVM. So we don't have, we have things to show, but it's quite limited. So the system commands, it's a composite command, and we can see system properties. We can even filter them using filter. And yeah, we can even filter furthermore. And what we can do is that we can change the filter property. For instance, we can do or just get one property. like Java
Yes,
Let's
we can.
Get? Yeah, so that's the completion. You see, we have a very nice completion, and we can see that when you have system prop, you have prop ls, prop set, prop get, prop rm. It's to interact with them. So that's it. And we have also, yes, that's interesting. It's thread ls, so we can list all the threads of the virtual machine that are currently running. What we can do is that we can filter. Yes, so that's the thread top. I think you're a bit in advance. Yeah, no, it's okay actually. So yes, we can list thread by group, or by, we can filter by state. Yes, and finally what we can do is, yes, we have the thread top. So that's what I did recently, the thread top. No, it's because it should be, it's runnable, not running. Yes, it's an enum, so. Yeah, and then we have the thread top that allows us to see the different threads live. So that's a live view of all the threads in the virtual machine. And I think that's it, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So before we go in the second part, what is very interesting is that we are going to show you the web connector right now.
Yes. Okay, forgot this part.
So if you go first go on the site. And if you go on the site now, if you're in the room and you want to try CRaSH, go on CRaSH Hub.
Yes, the URL is www.crashhub.org.
Yes, if you go on the site, there is a demo here, and you can click on it. And here we have exactly the same. So that is hosted by CloudBees. So I'm doing free advertisement. And it's running in Tomcat 7. And we have exactly the same commands. And for instance, we can run the thread ls or the thread top. And that is using push data. So it push exactly the same data that you have seen before in the command line interface. We see it in the web interface. So it's interesting if you are running, I mean, if you don't want to provide an SSH access or something like this, but instead provide this access. We can even do powerful things with thread. We can stop thread, interrupt threads. Then it's up to us to develop that kind of commands. So let's go in the second part. Yeah, so let's get a bit more serious. So we have first seen the standalone mode. Now we are going to use the attach mode. So attach mode, the idea is that CRaSH is, I mean, you have a virtual machine and doesn't know anything about CRaSH. So you don't have anything to configure. And instead, before we use CRaSH-SH, so if you use CRaSH-SH and you provide it a process ID, it will connect to this JVM, start an agent, and download CRaSH in the JVM, and then you can start to interact with that JVM. So it's a bit piracy, I will say. So here in this example, we used JBoss application server 7, sorry. I'm a bit disturbed because soon they are going to rename it, so I don't know what name I should use. So we start S7, and now we use the JPS command, and JPS gives us the process ID, which is 1448. And now we use CRaSH, and we give the process ID. And now we are running, so we still have the command line interface in our shell, but this is, the runtime is in JBoss S7. So there isn't one command to send a log message. So if we send a log message, so that will use Java util logging. No, you should put -m for the message. Yeah, I designed this command a long time ago, and it's a bit crappy. That's it, so you don't see anything. But if we go in S7, at the very bottom, we can see hello devox. So we executed that in that context. So what is interesting when we use this is application server has a lot of resource on, I mean, before it was standalone and we didn't have much to show, but in application server we have a lot of resource to use and and to interact with. So the first one is GenDI. CRaSH has a GenDI command out of the box. So we can use it to see what is deployed in JBoss AS. So we have the data source, everything. We can filter only the data source or only EMF, I don't know what it is. Yes, yes, that's the JPA. And we can be verbose and know what class it is associated with. And now we are going to be a bit more serious and use JDBC command. So you have seen we have data source deployed. So you see we have very nice completion with GenDI, so you don't have even to know the name of the data source. And here the idea is that usually we use a database and we connect to the database with the native client. So if you are using Oracle, it's SQL Plus, MySQL, it's MySQL, etc. And here the idea is that we reuse the connection from the database. So anything that is configured as a data source in JBoss, in the server, we can use it. So now we are connected, we have opened the connection. So we borrowed one connection from the pool, and it's in CRaSH session. So let's use it a bit. So we can access all the metadata from here. So we see that by default it's Apache Derby. We can see all the tables. So that's tables we have in that, that's quite obvious. And for a table, we can have like the product table, we can know everything about it. And now we can also, of course, execute some queries. So we can, it's not a SQL course, but it's more. So that's what we can do with it. And now the next step is to go even further. In the application server, we have JPA applications deployed. And that JPA application is deployed as Entity Manager Factory, the EMF you have seen before, in GenDI. So what we can do is that you have a JPA command, and we open the pet store EM factory. And now we are going to do exactly the same we did for JDBC, but using JPA, and it's more interesting because the first thing we do is JPA entities, and here we can see all the entity beans that have been deployed that are in the current persistence factory. And like we had JDBC table, we have JPA entity that gives us also metadata about one particular, so we have completion. So if you do JPA entity customer, we can see that it's a classic customer stuff with date of birth, Java util date. So we can check that everything is correct inside the persistence unit. And here what is really interesting is that like we did for JDBC to make queries, we can do queries also, but this time it will use JPA query language. So yeah, so that's the product entity. We can see some lines, and we can see all the relationships, the name. So in items, it's because it's a relationship. It's a one-to-many relationship. So we see all the items related to a product. And we can, of course, make, any kind of query, you can do JPA you can type it there. So here the idea is that you can use CRaSH and use it to interact with that. And test your queries live, and that's, I think, really queries live, and that's, I think, really powerful. So next step. Yeah, so that's, so we have seen how to use it in standalone, how to use it with attaching to JBoss S7. Now, some people, CRaSH is also very powerful if you use it in your own runtime. It means that you can have a product or a project and you want to have a console for your project. And that's also what CRaSH can do for you. In this example, we will deploy a Spring application, a web application with Spring. And we will show you what we can do with that. You have issues?
JBoss is dead.
JBoss is dead. Okay, so let's start this application. I think it's in Tomcat as far as I recall. Yeah. yeah, we have many demo, and there's always the curse of the demo effect. So for Spring, we have a special kind of integration, but we also do have a generic integration for web applications. So for web applications, it's embedded as a servlet context listener. And in Spring, it's bean. And yeah, so now we use telnet. See, before it was attach, and now it's not. As we are in web application, and we connect to this application, we need to get the context of this application. So we cannot use attach, because attach is very global to the VM. And we cannot use direct command line, because the console is already used by Tomcat. So let's do that quickly, because time is running. So we have the Spring commands that allows us to list all the Spring beans deployed. So what we want to show you, yes, here is a Spring XML. So that's a CRaSH is deployed as a bean. And the property file we have got before, we have it as a properties in the bean. And what we are going to do now is very simple. We are going to use Groovy and code a Twitter command quickly. So that's how we get beans. So if that's Groovy, it's a very powerful language. So, and if we do that, and we return it, yeah, and we execute the command, so now we can modify the command live. So we can code live. So we see the Twitter service that the bean was retrieved from Spring. And now what we do is that this Twitter service has a simple methods just to get access Twitter. We could have done it without that, but we wanted to show you that you can reuse your existing beans. So here the idea is that we don't use anymore the global-wide available objects like GenDI or threads, but we use your objects. So by default, yes, we have, so that's the, not by default, but let's finish that, because the part after, don't have much time anymore. You want my help? No, I'm kidding, go ahead. So here we use JSON slurper and stuff like this, so that's, now we have a Twitter command, and finally, yes, we finish it. We parse the JSON, and yeah. Now it's JSON, it still looks the same. And finally, we iterate over all the results. So what is interesting here is that we can create the command and write it incrementally. And I mean, the development lifecycle is really, really fast, as you can see. And I think we are done after that. And that's it. Yes, you have less results now. So we could go further and make this command much more complex. So we have annotations to create multi-commands and to create arguments and options, but we don't have time to do it now. So the last part, yes, it's CRaSH for monitoring purpose. So in this use case, we use a new JVM plugin. Oh, it's Visual VM. I always say JVM, but. So we are going to use attach mode, like we did for JBoss S7, but instead of being from the command line, we do it from Visual VM. So when you run Visual VM, so we start Tomcat, so we're going to use Tomcat. And now we can see Tomcat in the list of the available applications. And now you have a CRaSH, so we connect to CRaSH. So to install it, it's quite easy. You go on crashshop.org and you have a page about it, and then it's just about adding a repository, a plugin repository to your Visual VM. So here we do have the same CRaSH, so with completion, so we can do, yeah, so what we do now is that we're going to use JMX, and we will use some mbeans from, so JMX find, list all the mbeans in the mbean server. So by default, you have really many of them. So if we had, now we can filter it. You see, -p Catalina, colon G2E type. And now we have less, much less much less MBeans. And the next step, now we're going to show you one very powerful thing in CRaSH. It's a pipe. So we do have a pipe, but it's not a pipe. Unlike in Unix, it's not a pipe of data like a stream. It's a pipe of objects. So any command is able to consume, when we do advanced command, to consume or produce objects, and even transtype them, transform them, filter them. That's the idea. So in that case, we use JMX find, which produce object name. We use JMX get that consumes object name and produce a map of attributes. And the last one is sort, which is a very generic command that sorts a list of a stream of objects. So let's do that in one time and not. Yeah. So we are, I think, running out of time. So we want to finish that and show you the last feature. So now we have a very complex command, and this command shows us what matters here is that we have a table and we have all the servlets we want, and the request count, the processing time, and so on. So now, last part of this is that we reuse that and we are going to make a dashboard. Dashboard has been added in 1.2. And the idea is to have a visual structure. So it's Groovy, we can see, shows the dashboard. So it's, if you are familiar with Groovy builders, it's Groovy builders. So we have builders with table and header, table, label. And inside this structure, this data structure, we can reuse existing commands. So we take the one we had, we just wrote. So show us the current dashboard. So before we had the admin, the thread top command that is able to push data to the client. Here there's the same ID. So our default dashboard, we have already statistics. At the top here, it's the heap, so it's the garbage collection stuff. So now we modify it, and we had, eval. So just show us the admin. Yes, we copy it, and we put it in the dashboard at the top in execute. So the very long line with the pipes you created, we use it. So any command you create, you can reuse it and create a dashboard with it. So now show us the dashboard, the monitor dashboard. And now at the top, we do have the request count and so on. So now let's finish quickly the dashboards, and you see the bottom is empty. So what you add at the bottom is a thread, a command just to show the threads. So thread is quite easy. It's threadless. It's a command we used before at the very beginning. And now, okay, it doesn't display well for some reason. Sometimes it's you need to filter. You have some bugs sometimes. It's at the demo effect, I guess. We have been lucky so far. So last part, we use JMeter, and we are going to put some load. So it's not Gatling, it's JMeter. And we put load on the server. So you can see in real time, yes, that the processing time, the request count is changed. So we have built this monitoring dashboard. So final words. Let's go back on the slides and wrap up. So yes, wrap up. So you can see that CRaSH is a very generic tool, and I call it multifacet because you can do several use cases. I mean, you can execute several use cases with it. Sorry, previous slide. So it's very extensible and powerful. You can reach us on that. So CRaSH users is the user list, so we can ask questions. At CRaSH Hub is a new Twitter account and the site. Tomorrow, very important, if you want to be involved and use it, we will be at the Hackergarten hands-on coding Tuesdays tomorrow. So you can come, and if you want to get help to use it or contribute features, like you have the idea of a wonderful commands that we should have in CRaSH by default. Sorry. Okay, so I don't think we have time for questions, unfortunately, much. So I can take maybe one question. Yes, you?
How about the performance? Because if you are doing
Yes, I guess when you measure, as soon as you measure a system, it has it disturbs somehow the. I mean, it's like when you use a profiler, it will change the result. So I think the crash, the impact of crash will be really minimal, but it can have some effects. Yes. Okay, so time's up. If you have more questions, I'm available just after the talk. Come to me, and we'll discuss. And thank you for coming.